Let's jump right into this one because today we are exploring an absolutely wild, darkly comedic sci-fi pitch called The Logic of the Sticky Socks. For this explainer, we're looking at a deeply mind-bending narrative. Imagine this. One man's fight for his own sanity inside a psych ward suddenly morphs into a high-stakes heist. And his ultimate goal? To prove he's actually a lab rat in a biological simulation so he can win his freedom. The whole thing centers on a guy named David J. Joseph, who somehow has to survive relying on nothing but telepathic tactical advice and, believe it or not, a highly precarious string belt. It's a fantastic ride, so let's get into it.
Now think about this quote for a second. This throws us headfirst into David's core thesis. He states right out of the gate that while physics might drive the mechanics of the universe, only pure logic can actually prove simulation theory. He figures the universe forces scientists to do all the complicated math before it reveals any of its secrets. So he sets this massive cosmic stage before we even realize the physical limitations of his actual surroundings. He's crunched the numbers, and he's concluded that human existence only makes logical sense if we are in fact simulated.
To really grasp where our brilliant, though, highly unreliable narrator is coming from, we have to understand his specific worldview. He even diagnosed himself. He calls it DJJWS, or David Joseph Joseph Syndrome. In his reality, the universe isn't running on some digital computer code. No, he thinks the simulation runs on atoms and quarks. You gotta picture atoms as microscopic recording devices. Basically, they're cosmic GPS data loggers transmitting their coordinates in space and time every single millisecond back to some unknown creators.
All right, so let's get right into it. Act 1, the biological simulation.
Okay, so you have to completely toss out whatever you know about simulation theory. David is adamant that we are not digital avatars in some video game, and we definitely aren't trapped in the Matrix. Forget computer algorithms. He argues this is a sprawling biological and chemical lab experiment. We are literally just chemical variables bouncing around in a massive cosmic test tube. And if those creators don't get the data they want, well, they just tweak a chemical parameter and let the whole biological reaction run for another trillion years. Which naturally brings us to the big question, right? Why are the creators watching us specifically? Well, according to David, humans provide the raw randomness needed to generate true intelligence. Think about it. We're constantly moving, and our brains never, ever stop forming these totally unpredictable thought patterns. We're practically impossible to compress into a simple math equation. So to these creators, we're the absolute holy grail of data, churning out complex variables that pure physics on its own just couldn't make.
But here's where the dark comedy hits you like a freight train. Let's do a reality check. This incredibly important cosmic data logger, he's currently locked up in the dual-purpose psych and substance abuse ward of the Royal Columbian Hospital. He doesn't even remember how he got there. He showed up barefoot in jeans that are 3 sizes too big. From his perspective, the creators obviously hit a major glitch in his simulation, because right now he's just incredibly frustrated by a medical system that has him trapped in a media room watching the movie Chicken Little on a continuous loop. The contrast between his cosmic self-importance and his actual reality is just hilariously jarring.
Moving right along, let's look at Act 2, the Sean Protocol.
So things really start to escalate. David decides he needs answers, specifically his medical chart, because to him that's the sacred record of his simulation parameters. But he gets totally stonewalled by an unyielding nurse. His anger peaks, and suddenly he hears a voice. It's Sean, his old IT buddy who actually passed away. Now, David is extremely logical. Actually, scratch that, he's hyper-logical, so he absolutely insists he is not hearing ghosts. Instead, he calls this an emulated thought pattern. He knew Sean so well that he uses extreme empathy to simulate exactly what Sean would say in any given situation. So Sean essentially becomes this telepathic director in his head, offering these perfectly deadpan, highly strategic pro tips for surviving the hospital bureaucracy.
Deciding he needs to break the fabric of the ward's security, David plans a heist. But first, he needs the right gear. Since he arrived commando in massive jeans, he has to build this wildly absurd tactical outfit. He rigs up a belt using a string from a patient belongings bag. Then he layers a gray t-shirt under a very specific statement turtleneck. But the real masterstroke? Brown, sticky hospital socks. He applies his flawless logic and concludes that from a distance, the ground sticky socks will absolutely fool the security guards into thinking he's wearing real shoes. And of course, the whole grand escape fails spectacularly.
His master plan is to pull the fire alarm to trigger the emergency doors, but he gets completely tripped up by one of those simple clear plastic covers over the alarm box. He lifts the cover, which sets off this deafening localized alarm, totally panics and forgets to pull the actual lever. The doors stay locked. Defeated, he just retreats to a chair in the hallway and admits to us that his plan B is entirely non-existent.
Which brings us to Act 3, the hallway showdown.
Okay, here is the climax. It's this incredibly tense, socially distant standoff with hospital security, but it's all orchestrated like an action movie in David's mind. As a very angry nurse and 5 security guards close in, Sean's telepathic director's commentary tells David exactly what to do. First, the sock maneuver. Sean tells him to slowly peel off the sticky socks and shove them in his back pocket, visually proving he won't budge. Next is the Popeye reveal. He rolls up his sleeves to show off his tattoos, which he hilariously refers to as diminutive and inconsequential, as if they were massive muscles. Finally, when the guards actually grab him, he does the human kettlebell. He curls his arms and locks his feet, making his body as impossibly heavy and awkward as humanly possible. It's this brilliant physical comedy that he views as an act of cosmic defiance. But despite his flawless internal logic, David gets hauled away. And he doesn't just go back to his bed, he gets tossed into the quiet room. It doesn't even feel like a hospital in there. It feels like a terrible, low-budget movie set for a solitary confinement cell. We're talking a highly questionable mattress on the floor and one of those incredibly depressing all-in-one shitter-sink combos. It's a harsh reality check where his cosmic sense of peace just shatters. Yet right at the absolute peak of this awful tension, we get this incredible moment. The guards are awkwardly struggling to strip his clothes off, getting totally hung up on how to remove that statement turtleneck without snapping his neck. And right then, Sean delivers this perfectly deadpan punchline in David's mind. He just goes, "The turtleneck looks stupid, Dave." It's such a brilliant way to balance the sheer indignity of the situation with pure, laugh-out-loud dark comedy. Finally, we reach the resolution, Master of Free Will. This is where the sci-fi theory and the grim reality totally collide. Sitting there in the lotus position, in solitary, surrounded by cups of mystery hospital liquid, David makes a very real, very empathetic critique of the psychiatric system. He points out that the system just wants forced compliance rather than actual understanding. They want to mask who he really is with generic drugs like Ativan and Risperidone. And worse, they completely ignore his real physical suffering, like this severe 24/7 high-pitched tinnitus in his ears that's ruining his sleep. He realizes they aren't treating him, they're just treating a sedated, compliant version of him. But here is the massive takeaway he arrives at. Even though the medical mass and the hospital system fail him, his free will is still completely intact. He decides he actually doesn't care if his atoms are recording everything for some voyeuristic creator. The mere fact that he can sit in that awful cell, choose his own thoughts, and act in defiance, that proves he has free will. And because he has that free will, he determines that we really are the ultimate lab rats in a giant cosmic experiment. At the very end of the explainer, David literally looks dead into the security camera in his cell. He's defying the hospital staff, he's defying the universe, and he warns them all that once he's out of those locked doors, they won't be able to control him. It's a huge victory of the mind. And it leaves us with something pretty profound to think about regarding our own lives. If the creators really are out there mining our unpredictable lives for data, who is actually pulling your strings? And what exactly will you do with your own free will today?